right, is everybody ready? All right. So I'm Jonathan Robertson, and today, we're going to talk about investing your commissions. But how many of you bought lottery tickets? First of all, we were just talking about this. So it's 1.6 billion. So your chances are 1 in 302 million, I hear. It's good odds. 300 million. Yeah, good. It's good odds. So if you win, we were just talking about the question, you can actually take your money in a lump sum cash payment of 900 million, which then translates into like 500 million after tax, or you can take it over your life. So you have that investing decision to make tonight after you guys, after you win. All right, so today we're going to talk about sort of investing your commissions, and the first thing I wanted to just kind of mention to you was that good things come sometimes when you take time out of your day and you do an event, or you go to a conference, or you take the time to sort of invest in learning something about yourself. And I kind of wanted to prove it to you a little bit. This was a conference that was called the International Design Society of America, and this was in 2007. And what happened at this conference really affected Joe and Brian in a life-changing way with their experience, but it probably has affected you too. So I wanted to tell you their story. So Joe and Brian were recent grads of RISD, which is the Rhode Island School of Design. And they basically were beyond struggling in San Francisco. And they had just been camping. The other thing you should know about them, and they had 3 air mattresses in their closet, right? And they couldn't afford to go to the Marriott, by the way, where the conference was at. So their thought was, well, maybe we can make a little extra money and rent out our space, right? Maybe we could advertise hack up a little website. And this is Joe and this is Brian, and this is what they made. They made a little website. They called it Airbed and Breakfast. And what they thought was, we will basically offer people air mattresses on our floor and free Wi-Fi and a nice continental breakfast, not like this, but lesser than that. And for that, you can come and you can be here for half the price of what you can stay at the Marriott. Well, it turns out they had 3 takers. They had a family from India, not bringing the family, but the father of a family from India. They had a man from Utah, and they had a woman, mother of 3, all who were value-oriented, cost-conscious. They came, they had a great time, and they figured out, this was pretty sustainable business. So long story short, they changed the name Airbed and Breakfast, and this was their original little hacked up website, to Airbnb, right? So everybody thinks Airbnb is because it's like on the web and it's B&B, but the real starting point for the name was literally Airbed and Breakfast. And today, by the way, just checked last night, they had sold more rooms than Marriott. So good things come when you take time out and you go to a conference. So first thing, so we're going to talk today about investing and investing your commissions. And the starting point I just wanted to tee up for you is that there's no secret sauce to this, right? And there's no silver bullet, right? There's nothing I'm going to say today that you're like, wow, that's it, So because I think Oprah Winfrey said it best, right? The big secret in life is that there's no secret, right? You have to work hard in everything you do. You guys know that as commission, when you try to earn your commissions, and it's no different when you invest it. No shortcuts in life. All shortcuts by definition are false, right? If someone tells you can lose 300 pounds in 2 weeks, or that you can, become an Olympic runner in 2 days, by definition, that is not true, right? So you just have to outwork almost every problem. But to investing today, I thought I'd give us a little framework for how to divide the presentation. And I think the way to think about it is there are 2 types of basic investing that you could do with your commissions. You can invest indirectly or directly, right? So what does that mean, right? So indirect investments, by this I mean like what most of us do every day, right? You invest in stocks and bonds, in other traded investments. These are generally public things where there's lots of information, and you're not really involved in the day-to-day, right? Your basic decision is, how much do I invest, and when do I exit, and when do I enter, and that's kind of your level of involvement. On the other hand, there's direct investments, right? And we all have these opportunities, right? You have a friend who's starting a company, or you want to invest directly in a get together with friends and start a brokerage firm, start maybe some other type of business, real estate related or otherwise. These are direct investments. So you're really spending your time directly investing your resources in an idea, a project, or a company, right? These are primarily private, and you are very day-to-day involved. So for me, there are sort of different rules that you should attack each of these kind of investment types with. So we'll start today with indirect investing, right? Because that's what most of us do with the commissions, the extra resources that we have. And this is my kind of do's and don't list for indirect investment. So the first one is homework. Do it. And I've written these in Yoda style, where you put the subject first and the verb second, like, try not, do or do it, Jedi you are. So homework, do it is the first one. So what does that mean? So the first thing is, become an expert in whatever you're trying to invest in, right? Your goal in deal evaluation is to become an expert in the underlying security, right? And value, well, it doesn't matter if you've been to business school or if you've had a PhD in economics. We can all kind of figure out if something is valuable or not, right? And it's generally a function of a few things. And the first one is the market, right? Is the market growing? Is it shrinking? Is it sustainable? Is it going away? I mean, you can all think of examples of this, right? Like, old storage floppy disk, right? Probably not a good market to be in now, right? Blockbuster video, probably not a great market to be in, right? But on the other hand, streaming video, probably pretty interesting, right? Cassette tapes, probably not so interesting, right? Streaming radio, probably interesting. So think about the market first. Then the competitive position of the company. You want to invest in companies that have like a sustainable competitive advantage, a moat, as people say, right? Where, it's very hard to take away, what they have, right? Like we for example, have a investment in a fertilizer company, right? Which one of the raw materials is potash, right? Potash comes from very low-lying areas. And it just so happens that our plant is located next to the lowest place on the planet, right? And so it's a strategic, competitive, long-term, sustainable advantage. So what is that reason for your company to exist? Also, does it have great leadership, right? And we'll talk about this in a second, but nothing is static anymore, right? Companies either grow or they decline, but nothing's kind of staying as is, and you really need sort of problem-solving leaders. And then structure, right? Are you investing in debt or stock? Are you investing in the fulcrum security that you could in that investment? And then price. Right? And end of the day, despite what anyone says, price is always a function of the cash flows of the underlying company. And we'll talk about that in a second. But the key takeaway here is whatever you're doing, do your homework. Right? And there's kind of, in some ways, we live in a world today where you don't need Bloomberg terminals and you don't need a hotline to JP Morgan, right? You guys can go on your computer, you can do Yahoo Finance, and any company that's publicly listed is 100% available to you. And I just wanted to mention that information today is so out there. If you guys were to read Sunday's edition of the New York Times, that you would have taken in more information than a 17th century human would have run across in their entire lives. One thing of the New York Times, right? Another way to say it, I was at a event in Los Angeles last week where Eric Schmidt spoke. And Eric Schmidt, for those of you who are aware, is the chairman of Alphabet, which is the holding company for Google. And Eric Schmidt has calculated that there are, from the beginning of humanity until the year 2003, there were 5 exabytes of information that we created as humans, right? An exabyte is 1 cotillion bytes. Right, it's like if your computer has 5 megabytes of 5 gigabytes of memory on it, it's 1 billion of those, right? So that's as much information as we created from the dawn of humanity till 2003. It turns out that Google now actually catalogs that much information every 2 days. right? So RJ Metrics says it slightly differently. Their calculation is that 23 exabytes were created until 2002, and we calculate it in 7 days. But whether it's 2 days or 7 days, the one thing is for sure is that information is completely out there, right? There's no excuse for not having information. In fact, we generally have the opposite problem, right? Which is we have information overload. So what does that mean? It means that you have to really know what it is that you're investing in, because if you don't know what you're investing in, it is absolutely impossible to determine what matters and what doesn't matter, right? Does it matter that mortgage rates are moving up? Does it matter that there is an issue now with Saudi Arabia in the news where they may get internationally isolated to your particular investment? Does it matter what oil price is? You don't need to know all of that. You need to know what matters for your investment. So it's really super important that you do your homework and you know what it is that you own, right? So another way to say it is that information is only as good as your ability to kind of, put it to use in what you own. So do your homework, first of all. Know what you own, because then you can filter all this great information that's coming at you, every day. The second thing is, use your edge, right? Everybody has an edge. You guys know something, you're specialists and experts in something. I guarantee it. It may be the Brazilian market. It might be what's happened historically in Argentina. It might be, how to use Snapchat in Argentina. Whatever it is, you're an expert in that area, right? So we at TG Capital, our edge is we sort of define ourselves this way. We're very patient. We have very patient capital, right? We have flexible capital, so we can buy into the stocks and bonds and any kind of part of the capital structure that we want. We use it in a contrarian way, so we generally buy when other people sell. And we have non-myopic capital. So we look at 10-year, 20-year horizons. So we do projects like this one behind that take a lot of time, that don't have a return in 1 year, but have a larger return over 5 or 10 years. And we use industry expertise. So we do the same industries over and over and over again. So we mentioned fertilizer, for example. So we don't have one investment in fertilizer. We like that, the population's growing like this and arable land is growing like this, and we need to, find more green friendly ways to feed the world with less inputs, right? So we like that space generally, and we have 3 or 4 investments in that space at any given time. So use your edge. Warren Buffett, said everybody has a circle of competence, right? And the secret is to stay inside your circle, right? Now, lesser known is Warren Buffett's partner, who I think is the real genius in Berkshire Hathaway, Charlie Munger. And Charlie says, know your edge of competence, right? So when you do that, you make smart decisions, right? Now, this is not to say that you can't make a decision. Someone tells you, Franco says, Jonathan, this stock is great and I don't know anything about it, but I buy it and it goes up 10% and I sell it and that was great. But that doesn't mean that it was smart, right? I mean, Charlie Munger says, look, you can light a match and you can run through a dynamite factory and, it's very possible nothing will happen. But that doesn't mean it was smart, right? And in the same way, like you can do this, right? You can make investments based on what your friends say. You can do all the, you can follow those kind of paths with little information, but it doesn't mean that you're really in your area of competence. So you should define your strike zone. And I think the best way to do this is the art of hitting, right? So, and this is Ted Williams. And so Ted Williams literally wrote a book called The Art of Hitting, where he divided the strike zone, which is, from here to your knees, when you're batting, and he divided the top into 7 segments, like pixels. And he divided it vertically into 11. So 7 times 11, so he had 77 different circles. And what he figured out was every time he hit a pitch that was right here in these red and orange areas, that he would bat 400 if he could just hit those pitches, right? But every time it was low and outside, he was a left-handed batter. So every time he tried to swing down here, he would bat 230. Right? So for him, the thing was he had to swing at the pitches where he was good, right? And the same idea is true in investing. But we have a significant advantage, right? So, and by the way, I went back last night and I looked at the 10 investments where we returned the highest amount, right, in the last 10 years. And it was true in each case that the most sensitive factor was the price at which we bought them. Right, so you should only swing at those pitches where you think, hey, this is a home run. I can bat 400. This is within my area of competence. The great thing about it, though, I mean, and when you do that, by the way, when you buy well, it makes the exit so much easier. But the great thing about this is that investing is a no-strike call business, right? So the difference between Ted Williams and us is when Ted Williams got 2 strikes, he had to swing at that low outside pitch if it was in the strike zone. But you and I don't. Right? We don't have to do anything that you don't have to invest in anything that you don't want to, right? And this is a really hard lesson because we're all, generally try to be pleasers in life, but most highly successful investors, they say no a lot. Right, a lot. They say no a lot more than they say yes. So we looked hard at 342 investments last year. We made 2 big ones, right? So that was roughly our statistical odds, right? But you have to be willing to say no, right? When it's not in your strike zone. So this is I grew up in North Carolina, and this was actually the lake where we used to raft. And when I was 16 years old, my dad took me to this particular lake, and it was after final exams. And he told me, and I was kind of half listening as 16-year-olds do, but he gave me a raft and he gave me a paddle, and he said, Jonathan, just remember that every few minutes, just paddle a little bit to the left, right? And, I was sort of half listening. But he said, because as you go up the river splits, right? And the left is super calm, and you'll have a great time. But if you go on the right, it eventually looks like this, and then it eventually looks like this, and then it looks like that. I said, I got you, Dad. I understand. And then I did what all 16-year-olds do. I went to sleep. So I kind of fell asleep, and then the paddle drifted off, and I didn't know it. And then a rock hit the bottom, and of course I was on the right, and it sort of punctured the raft, so it was leaking air at a pretty rapid rate. And then I was woken up to some yelling, right? And my dad was doing the airport thing, like, ah, and my mom was doing the, my God, my son's gonna die thing. And my sister was laughing hysterically at me. And then I figured, look, I panicked, right? And I figured I can only do the one thing, I just have to bail out, right? Because I could see the zero elevation, like some of the pools that Michael designs in Acqualina. I could see this zero elevation fall that looked like pretty crazy coming up, and I could see I didn't have my oar, and the inner tube was sinking, about to sink, and I figured the only thing I could do is just jump out, try to make it to the shore. So with all the courage I could, I just bailed out, I just jumped out, and then all of a sudden I literally stood up in a foot of water, right? And it literally didn't come to my knees, right? And I thought to myself, look, had I known what that was like, I wouldn't have panicked, right? Had I had competence, area confidence, right? Had I really understood, where I was, I would have had much solid footing, right? And so the reason that you should only invest in things you really understand is because when things get choppy and panicked and the world kind of gets crazy around you, then you'll have solid footing, right? You'll be able to know where you are, and then when the world kind of starts to, the stock market's like it is today, I mean, you don't panic, right? The worst thing you can do is panic, right? So have confidence, area, competence, right? So the next thing, so do your homework, use your edge. The next thing is diversify, but don't overdo it. So this is my, in finance class in school, the first thing that I was taught was diversification is the first free lunch. Right? And this is true, by the way, that you should invest in things that are uncorrelated, and if one thing goes down, the other won't, and you shouldn't invest in all FANG stocks, for example. And that is a really true lesson. But what I've learned in 20 years here, and eventually want to kind of put this, write about it a little bit, but it is important not to have all your eggs in one basket, right? But it's much more important to keep an eye on your basket. Right? And much more important, right? And the real true thing is that there's no such thing as passive investing, right? The worst thing you can do, and I was talking with someone, is that you just hand it over to someone else and blindly let them invest, right? Because you know what? You guys are all super smart people, right? So anybody who tells you something that you can't understand, with Jules and I, we meet with a lot of people. If someone comes in and they tell us something, we look at each other, we don't understand what they say after 5 minutes, you know what we do? We pass. right? Because we figure, look, we're not the smartest guys in the world, but you know what? We're pretty smart, and if it doesn't make sense to us, it probably doesn't make sense. And in the same way, if you guys go and someone's like, giving you intimidating gobbledygook, and it doesn't make any sense, what I would encourage you to do is leave. Right, and find a place that sort of will explain it in a way that it makes sense, because you have to have that confidence in yourself. So you really have to. Another way to say this is earn your return, right? Deserve your return. So this is kind of my Jonathan special chart that I tried to explain this to. But so diversify, but I would encourage you not to hold 100 things that you have no idea what the 100 things do. Right? Because, if you're going to do that, you might as well just buy an index fund and get the market return. And that, by the way, is a great idea. Do it low fees and do that. But if you're trying to invest and you're trying to pick stocks, this is what the marginal utility of diversification curve looks like. Right, if you look at the business schools, right? So it turns out that you get most of the value of diversification after 3 uncorrelated stocks. You get 90% of the value after 4, and you get 99% after 5, right? Now, to overlay that, this is how many things you can really monitor at one time. Right, really effectively. One person can really keep up with 3 things, 4 things pretty good, 5 things maybe, 6 things. So diversify, but really know what you own, right? It's much more important to understand sort of the marginal, disutility of over diversification, right? So know what you own. Don't have all your eggs in a basket, but you don't need 1,000 eggs. You need 10 things that you really understand that you can really focus on and you can really keep your eye on. So diversify, but don't overdo it. The last thing for do's before you invest on indirect investing is plan backwards from your goals, right? So what do we mean by this? Not this, we don't mean that. We mean what Arthur Miller, one of the greatest writers of the last couple centuries, said. He's like, look, I start from the ending and then I work the book backwards, right? And then I write, the book. So this is the same thing in investing, right? Start and ask yourself the basic questions, right? And if you go to a private banker, this is what they'll ask you. And this is why. They're trying to understand what the end of your book looks like so they can give you a plan. Right? So, what's your time horizon, right? Are you young like Stephanie and you have, 50 years? Well, maybe you should just invest in stocks, right? You can handle all the volatility. Are you older like me and, you can't, have that level of volatility? So, what level of risk can you manage, right? And ultimately, what's your long-term goal? Do you want kids to go to college? Do you want to retire at 50? What are those goals? And then when do you need the liquidity? If you have that, the plan becomes pretty simple, right? And that's essentially what financial advisors are doing. They do it in crazy spreadsheets and everything like that, but essentially they're starting with the end goal and they're working backwards. And you can do that largely for yourself. The greatest example of working backwards is Brad Snyder, and he's one of my favorite Paralympians. And one of the boards that I'm most honored to serve on is the United States Olympic and Paralympic Foundation. And Brad was a naval officer, and he was in Afghanistan, and he improvised explosive device went off, and he went to the front. He was in the back of the line, and as he made his way to the front, a secondary device went off right in his face. And he woke up 56 hours later. He was in Bethesda, Maryland, and he actually had all of his limbs intact. And he had his feet, his hands, everything was intact, his brain function, but he lost his eyesight, right? And so people came to see him, at his bedside, and this is him in those days, and everybody expressed empathy and sympathy. And then his high school swim coach showed up and said, hey, you know what, we're practicing at 5 a.m. tomorrow, be there, right? And so Brad, sure enough, showed up, and they taught him how, look, if you hit the lane guides, just move over a little bit to the left, and if you hit the one on the left, move over a little bit to the right. And he learned to have his position, and they tapped him with a long pole with a tennis ball when he got close to the edge. And it turned out he was pretty fast in high school, but he was even faster after being in the Navy. And so we heard about him, brought him to Colorado Springs, and he swam the fifth fastest 50-meter time in the world, right? 1 year out, and this was, less than a year out from the London Olympics. So we put a lot of emphasis on Brad, and he trained really hard. It turns out almost, a year from the time when he lost his eyesight, he won the gold medal in the 50-meter free in London. And then he went to Rio, and he tripled his medal count, right? So it's pretty amazing, and he has this great watch, and I forgot to wear it today, which I love, where you can kind of just tell the time by your It's great when you give a speech because then you don't have to look down. You can just feel the time. But one of the things that Brad really struggled with, his coach was like, hey, how can I help you do things better? And what can I help you in this post-site world that you're entering? What are you having problems with? And he said, look, the thing I just really struggle with is actually brushing my teeth. And I never thought about this, but it's like an immensely visual thing, right? Because you put the toothbrush there and you squeeze, and how much you squeeze is a function of the volume that you see in the tube, right? Maybe you roll it up, maybe you squeeze, depending on what your strategy is. But then, you also have to watch the bristles, and then you stop, after the bristle is basically filled, and then you put it in your mouth, right? But it's an immensely visual exercise if you think about it. So Brad was super frustrated. He had like gobs of toothpaste in the sink, and then he had nothing on the bristle, and he's like, man, I cannot figure this out. And his coach then said something that was brilliant. He's like, Brad, you got to work the problem backwards. He's like, where do you want what do you want to do here? He's like, well, I just want the toothpaste on the toothbrush so I can brush my teeth. He's like, so what you're saying to me is you need the toothpaste in your mouth. He's like, so just take the bottle, squirt it in your mouth, and then brush your teeth, right? So if you work backwards from what your goal is, right, it becomes super easy. Sometimes problems that are very hard to solve linearly are super easy if you invert them, right? And this is I think lesson one of investing is, this was Carl Jacobi, for those of you who don't read German, basically what this says is invert, always invert, right? So I have 12-year-old twins who are doing algebra, and you invert in algebra, right? It makes the problem easier, right? I have a 16-year-old who just started driving. It's really easy to say, be a safe driver. It's actually much more productive to tell them what not to do, right? To invert the problem. Hey, don't change lanes until you put on a blinker, right? Don't look at your phone, right? If you give them a series of inversions, it makes them a better driver a lot easier than telling them what to do. And in the same way, investing, don't think about how you're going to make a lot of money. Right? I mean, what Jules does, I think, brilliantly with us is, let's go over how you're going to lose money. What is going to go wrong, right? I mean, what are all the downsides, right? And that's where you focus, right? So if you can focus and eliminate all those, invert the problem, how do you lose money, right? One of the things Charlie Munger says, if I could tell you with certainty in the location in which you would die, right, you would never go there. Right? And it's the same thing. If I could tell you in a business or in a stock how you could lose money, what the one thing you would do is you would avoid that at all cost, right? So flip the problem. I mean, think about how you can lose money instead of make money, and I think it creates a lot of value. So, all right, so those are all the things I think you should do before you make an investment, right? Do your homework, use your edge, figure out what your circle of competence is and what diversify, but don't over-diversify. And then plan backwards, right, from whatever your goals are. And then after you make the investment, don't do any of these things, okay? So the first thing is don't panic, right? So don't do what I did when I was on that raft, right? Don't panic. I mean, that's if you go to, in the movie 21, right? The gentleman who almost broke the bank in Vegas now works for Twitter, by the way, and before that worked for a group called Radar Partners. He's a super smart mathematician from MIT. And what he said is the problem that most people make when they go to Las Vegas is they say, I'm going to play until I lose $200. Well, you know what that virtually guarantees you to do? Lose $200, right? If you said, I'm going to play until I'm going to win $200, then you would end on a high note. If you said, I'm going to play for 3 hours and then leave as entertainment, then that would guarantee you a different result. But by definition, in volatile things like stocks, if you panic or if you sell at the bottom, you will by definition, make less money than you otherwise would. So don't panic. The other thing is don't take your eyes off bonds, right? And I know this sounds kind of weird, but I think in today's world, this is really important because like when we watch football or basketball, we all like to follow the ball. And the same thing is like investments, you like to watch your stock, but bonds are like the defense, right? It's like what the alternative is being compared, the stocks are being compared against. So don't take your eye off the ball. And I thought to show you this, I'd show you an interesting example here. So what I want you to do is don't take your eye off of the white t-shirts, and I want you to count how many times they pass the ball. Okay, that's the only thing I want. Just how many times do the white people pass the ball? Do not take your eyes off the people in white. Guys got it? All right, how many times?
16.
Okay, 16 is the correct thing. Did anybody notice anything weird in the video?
Yeah.
How many people saw something come in? How many people saw something come in? How many people did not see a gorilla? I didn't see it the first time. Anybody not see a gorilla? Okay, let's watch it again. So this is, if you're just following your stock, right, you're going to miss stuff. So watch again, right? So, and this time, don't follow the ball, okay? Just look generally at the video, right? All right, let me see if I can fast forward it. We don't need. Okay. Oh, okay, here we go. All right, so we're. So you guys see that? Now, how many of you, okay, for those of you who think you're observant, how many of you saw that they changed the curtain in the background? Probably not many, right? How many of you saw that they took away one of the players in black, right? So, okay, so the point here is, you can't just blindly keep your, like, look, I'm, I love to watch the ball in sports, right? But the idea is in investing, don't take your eyes off the alternatives, right? And the alternative now to stocks is bonds, right? So, I mean, because investors will keep their eye there. So never give up on value either. Yes?
Do you take questions now or later?
Either way, yeah.
Okay. So, in that case, because you were mentioning earlier to diversify, right? Not keep your eggs in one basket. So in this case, let's say counting the white t-shirts with the balls popping around, I got the right answer, for example, right? And that's because I wasn't paying attention to everything
Right,
else.
right.
But since it is important to be aware of what's going on,
How do you balance that?
what's going to
Yeah.
happen with my, let's say, correct answer
Yeah.
in regards to what I'm looking to invest?
Yeah, so the key is, so this goes back, and we'll talk about it more later, but this goes back to the fact that you have to so know what you own that you know what matters, right? And then that's what you have to watch, right? So like, let's say you're investing in a, let's say you're investing in a, in a fertilizer company, right? You need to know the world price of potash, right? You need to know the world price of ammonia, right? If you're doing potassium nitrate, you need to know, what's happening in the countries in which you're doing. You need to filter the information that matters. But if you're, it probably doesn't matter to you, what is happening with, XYZ, right? Like, does import and export, does what's going on with tariffs in China, does that matter? If you own a toy company, it probably really, really matters to you. If you own a small cap stock, that only does business in South Carolina, it probably, doesn't, if all the parts and everything are right there. So what I guess the point is, you have to start, the starting point has to be know what you own, and then from that, you have to develop another circle of what really is going to affect that business, and that's what you follow. Right? But you can't, but we all need to be aware of what's going on in the larger world, right? Like today's a day where no matter what you own, my guess is if you go check your stock, everything's down, right? So, so the big trends do matter. We'll come back to it in more detail. And then never stop reevaluating. Now that's the other last. So this covers everything in the indirect bucket, right? So let's go to direct now. So direct is this is a style of investing that we do traditionally, right? Where you're investing directly into a project, an idea, or a company. It's generally private, and you're very involved day to day. This is what we do here for the most part. Everything that we just said applies. Right, you have to do your homework. You have to make sure, that you diversify but not over-diversify. You have to work backwards. All those things still apply. In addition, it's harder, right? Because the one thing you can't do is you can't dabble, right? So this is Malcolm Gladwell. For those of you who have read, Outliers, he has a chapter called 10,000 Hours, and he says that for any cognitively complex action, that it takes 10,000 hours to get really good at it, right? If you want to play basketball like LeBron James or play the violin like Yo-Yo Ma, or if you want to invest like Warren Buffett, it'll take you 10,000 hours to even start to become sort of competent at it. And I just want to point out to you what 10,000 hours is, right? If you have a son or daughter who's trying to be great at something, if you guys are trying to master a craft, 10,000 hours is 4 hours a day, it's 5 days a week, it's 52 weeks a year, that gives you 1,040 hours. So you do that 4 days a week, 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year for 10 years. Right, that gets you to 10,000 hours. So the point of this is that dabbling and investing, direct investing, they don't mix well, right? So if you don't have the time to do this and put a lot of time into this, then I would encourage you not to do it. I mean, focus on the indirect side. But if you do, I mean, the one thing that I would encourage you, and this is something that we absolutely insist upon here, is the concept of an asymmetrical return. So I'd say if there's one defining thing that Jules and I look for in an investment, it's an asymmetric return, right? This is, so my personal rule is 5 to 1. Right, you invest $1, you get 5, and if you're wrong, maybe you get 3. But the 5 to 1, you can develop your own system, but you want asymmetric, what you risk and what you could potentially get back. This is, not a asymmetric return. Where, let me see if I can show you a graph real quick. I don't have one, but maybe it'll come up a little bit later. I can't remember where I put it. But the way that so how do you do this? The way that you create an asymmetric return is you spot and you structure away downside, right? So, for example, this is. You guys know who this is? Richard Branson, right? He's thought of as a super risk taker, right? Flies around the world, circumnavigates the globe, climbs mountains. So he started something called Virgin America, So he put money into this, and the idea was to create a super nice airline experience, right? Many of you have probably flown on Virgin America, right? So guess what Richard Branson did, right? He said, you know what, the biggest expense, the biggest risk for me in this business is the cost of the airplanes. So he basically did a deal with Boeing, and he said, after 1 year, I can give you back the airplanes at cost, right? After 2 years, I can give you back the airplanes plus 2%, right? So he eliminated all the downside. He told his people, you have 2 years to make this work. Right, he eliminated all the asymmetric returns, and then he just leased the planes for a couple years. So he put his capital in a very limited way into what matters. This is Stanley Druckenmiller, and he is one of the greatest investors of our time. And he said, it doesn't matter how often you're right or how often you're wrong. What really matters is how much you lose when you're wrong and how much you make when you're right. Right, and so a way to look at this is a asymmetric return looks like the downside is here and the upside is that. If you see a graph where it's a straight line, that's not what you want, right? So you don't want to lose $1 or make $1. You want to risk $1 to make 5, right? So insist upon an asymmetric return if you're trying to do that. The other thing is, after you make the investments, after you do all those things that you would do in indirect investments, then find problem-solving leaders to be involved in that company, right? Don't actually get involved if there's not problem-solving leaders. And here's why. People always ask us, what makes one investment good? What makes, something do better than another? All these questions. The answer to all these questions, what makes a good investment? Why do people flock to a certain company? Why do some companies just grow like weeds and others don't? It's the answer is always, problem-solving leadership, right? That's the most important factor when it comes to that. And that's true today because we live in a time where this is the patent application curve of the last few years, right? So it's gone from 300,000 patents to 600,000 patents, right? The equivalent to the patent application curve in biotech is the Carlson curve. This is how much it costs to sequence a single genome. And it used to cost $100 million and take 10 years. And at Stanford University, they did 21,000 of them yesterday at a cost of $1,000 a genome. Right, so the world is changing super fast, right? So you need problem-solving leaders. This is how long it took for this technology to make itself and penetrate itself into the U.S. marketplace. When the telephone was introduced, it took 40 years, right? When the television was introduced, it took 27 years. When the personal computer was introduced, it took 16 years. When the internet was released from CERN, the World Wide Web, it took 6 years. And by the way, the bottom of this graph is a growing denominator, right? So it's more impressive. So it's decreasing time over a bigger population. You know how long it took Pokemon to get to 25% market penetration, by the way? If we added it to the graph, any ideas? 13 days. 13 days. So that's the craziness, right, of where we are today. So change, and what we're going through means that you've got to find a business that has a problem-solving leader. And in fact, I mean, before we go off this, I just wanted to mention, I mean, it is so important to find, problem-solving leaders because the teams sometimes matter more than the ideas. And I'll just give you a couple examples. Do you guys know? Do you know the original business that Suzuki was in? Like, what do you guys know Suzuki for? Like cars, right? Yeah, so it was weaving looms was their original business. Nintendo, the original business of Nintendo? Anybody know? Instant rice. And then they went into hotel chains. And then after that, they went into robotics. And then some innovative engineer on the line was playing around with a robotic arm, and he started to call it a helping hand, and he reduced the size, and it became what we now know as a joystick. Right, and then that became Donkey Kong and all that stuff that you now think about as Nintendo, right? So there was a guy named William, right, who used to sell soap, right, and he was not selling, right. This was like 65 years ago, and so when he went house to house, so he started to give people a stick of gum with it, and it turned out that after time he learned that people didn't want the soap; they just wanted the gum. Right, so this guy William, then said, what? His last name was Wrigley. He said, well, I'll just invent something called Juicy Fruit, and then that became Spearmint, and that became Double, whatever, and that was the invention of Wrigley. I mean, more recently there was a company, and Jules and I invested in this company. There's a company called Tote, right, and Tote was this application where primarily female users would go and would tag stuff that on the web that they liked, and it would send you a message whenever it was on sale. And then what they figured out was that the user base was sharing the information with friends, right? To say, hey, look, go get this, go get that, go get that. But it was going nowhere. And they said, we need to refocus this. So why don't we just call it, like, instead of that, why don't we just say that these are things you're interested in and you're pinning them. And then Tote changed its name to what you guys know now as Pinterest. Right? And so, things change a lot, right? And so the point of this is it really matters that you have a great team, actually more than it probably matters what the idea is, right, in today's day and age. So the other thing is, I would say, the last thing is deliver what you would want to buy. Right. I mean, in a product. I mean, think back from the product. Right. I mean, Jeff Bezos is probably the quintessential person to think about this. Miami guy, by the way. I mean, determine what you need. Work backwards. Steve Jobs said it the same way, right? Determine what your customers will want and then work backwards from there. Because ultimately, it's all about, in today's day and age, switching costs are lower across almost every industry, right? And so people can switch and do what they want, and so you really need to focus on the customer or the service. So let's just wrap up really quick. So we talked about two types of investing, indirect and direct, right? And if you're going to do indirect, which is investing in stocks and bonds and other things, then do these things, right? Do your homework, use your edge, diversify, plan, and then don't panic, right? Don't take your eyes off, the rest of the stuff going on in the world, and particularly bonds, and never stop reevaluating, right? And if you're going to do direct investing, if you have a friend and you're going to, invest in their company, make sure that you don't dabble in it, right? Make sure that you really insist upon an asymmetric return, and then make sure that they really have a great team. But I wanted to end with this quote, because the best investment you could ever make, by the way, most of us in this room will not make our primary money by investing in other things, right? Most of us will make our primary money by what we do day to day. And what Warren Buffett says, the best investment you can make is in yourself. And I would encourage you, that's the place to start, right? So human capital, taking time to come to things like this today, learning, always keeping yourself on a path of growth and where you're learning more and more about the world around you is the best investment that you can make. Right, is to invest in yourself. Strongly, strongly believe that. So we'll end with that thought, then we'll do questions, and I know some of you have to run, it's 11:15, but thank you for coming. I hope this helps, and I hope now you guys have a better sense of investing your commissions. All right. All right. Questions, or we could also talk one-on-one, if that's easier.
So the question that I had earlier, thank you for clarifying. So are you saying, am I understanding correctly, that we should have a buffer? Let's say, since I did so, when I just focused on the number of shirts, I counted 16.
Right.
But I missed everything else.
Right.
So if I do focus on both, and if I, let's say, see 14 instead of 16, Is
Right.
that like the way?
Yeah, the way I would say it is, I mean, start with this, you know, the way I think about the world of investing is start with, you know, what are you good at, right? What are you good, or you know, what do you understand, right? And what can you know, like if someone comes in to us and they say, hey, we want you to do dense wavelength multiplexing, and it doesn't make any sense to us, that may be the greatest investment in the world. By the way, that's the technology behind like conference calls and stuff. But if we don't really understand that, we shouldn't do it, right? I mean, on the other hand, if we understand the idea of how you can feed people with less inputs and less runoff, and we understand that kind of, you know, ag tech, then we should maybe go in that direction. So the first thing is just, you know, what do you feel comfortable with, right? I mean, do you truly understand the value of XYZ? Start with that. Know your area, and then within that, I mean, figure out like, you know, 6 to 10 things that you can really follow that are somewhat diversified, you know, and follow those things. And from there, you know, from those things, I mean, you know, then you'll know what really matters, right? Like for example, like let's say one of those things for you is Google. Right. So let's say one of those things is Google. Well, Google made $35 billion of net profit, but they in search and YouTube, they lost $5 billion in everything else that they do. Right. Driverless cars, all that other stuff. Right. So you really want to follow developments in those areas, right? And you want to follow other search engines. And you know, Google's not in China, right? So you can say to yourself, hey, that should probably do okay with what's going on in China, right? So if you know that company, you start to filter all the information, right? Let's say you really, you know, let's say another company that you really like is, you know, I don't know, Chipotle, right? Then you should really probably understand, you know, what's going on with, you know, other options that are out there for young people. And so in other words, what you choose is going to impact like what you need to follow, right? In other words, the 5 or 6 balls that you choose to follow are going to inform, you know, what is the larger scope of information that you really need to know, right? But it's a hard question to answer, if without knowing those specific things. The one thing I would say, by the way, just generally speaking, the one thing that always scares me as a, you know, is everyone is super smart, and for some reason investing is sometimes something that they will outsource. Right, generally speaking, right? It's not fun, or it's, you know, you push it to, and I would say generally that's a mistake, right? I mean, there's no such thing as passive investing in my mind, right? I mean, you need to understand what you're doing with your money. You can give it to somebody else, but you need to understand what their plan is for your money, right? And if you go somewhere and they tell you they're going to put you in structured finance stock, you know, and option calls and puts, and you're, you know, if it doesn't make sense to you, it probably doesn't make sense. Right? I mean, it's like if you know, it's if we explain, you know, to you the value of a condo, if it doesn't make sense, it probably doesn't make sense, right? And that's why, you know, you have to have valuable product, right? So, you know, that's the one thing. If there's one lesson in all of this for me today, it's that just know how brilliant you all are and trust it, right? That don't feel like, you know, because the person at the bank who's investing your money is probably, you know, done it for a shorter amount of time than you have, right? So that's the only thing that's the big piece of advice to me. But I know this is a hard question about how do you follow one thing and another thing, but let the companies that you decide to invest in inform the larger picture of what you decide to follow. Does that make sense? All right. All right, thank you guys. If you have other questions, we can talk.